It is Monday. We are talking Big Four hoops here on a Monday evening, just after dinner time for most of you. Thanks for tuning in. Again, talking Big Four hoops. I'm Jonathan Snyder, joined alongside once again my man Mike Bunt, and another busy week it was in Western New York College hoops. Another week, another confusing week, and we got a lot to make of it, Mike. So, um, Mike, any thoughts before we get going here on what you saw this week?
I will say the UB St. Bonaventure game did not go the way I expected. Things overall, I'm excited about where this season is headed. You have conference play underway in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference. We have some good things to talk about Canisius, some good things, I mean, for Niagara, some bad things with Canisius, and then obviously the big UB St. Bonaventure matchup. So we have a ton to discuss this week, and it's going to be a fun show.
Yeah, so it was another week, like you just mentioned, of inner Big Four games, and it's always exciting when we get those. Unfortunately, Mike, we're done with those outside of the two conference games in Canisius and Niagara. Um, but let's just dive right in. Topic one we wanted to talk about today clearly is the UB dominant performance over St. Bonaventure this past Saturday inside Alumni Arena. It was Curtis Jones and Zid Powell combining for 55, Curtis Jones 32. I mean, Mike, they dominated the game pretty much from the tip. The outcome was really never in question, especially in the second half. And we talked last week about our predictions and what needed to happen in order for each team to win. And I don't think, even with the things that went well for UB, I don't think either of us predicted or would have thought that if those things had went well, it would have resulted in a 17-point win, Mike. Would you agree?
100%. Never would have seen UB winning this game by 17. If they did win, I thought it would be a close game down to the wire. And the score was closer at some points than what the final indicated. But this was a game where UB controlled the play from the very beginning and outplayed St. Bonaventure for 40 minutes. We thought that Bono would have a better chance at controlling the pace. They typically slow down their opponents to their pace and make things tough for opposing offenses. But UB was able to shoot a high percentage. Curtis Jones looks like he's an emerging star in the Mid-American Conference. Zid Powell, definitely a solid number 2 scoring threat for UB. But Bonaventure had a few things that really hurt them on Saturday afternoon. Number one, Chad Venning got into early foul trouble. He had 2 fouls right off the bat, had to sit for large portions, only saw the court, let's see, I think 12 minutes total for the game, had 0 points, 3 rebounds, non-factor. He was going to be a guy that was expected to make an impact on the game. He couldn't. Secondly, Barry Evans, starting for St. Bonaventure, only 2 points on the day and 3 rebounds. So you have 2 of your key forwards on your squad completely neutralized, nothing off the bat. So this was a game where really St. Bonaventure in this situation needed Jan Farrell to step up, and they needed their guards, Kyrell Luke and Banks, to really have strong performances. Jan Farrell was strong. He had a solid performance, 18 points, I believe, 9 rebounds. Struggled from the free throw line, 2 for 6, not the end of the world. But the senior guard, Banks, and Kyrell Luke just did not have the performances needed by St. Bonaventure to keep up with this UB team. And quite frankly, that is a little bit of a concern, considering those are 2 guys that were expected to be steady while these young freshman forwards and Evans and Farrell were supposed to develop. And they were outplayed pretty badly by Jones and Powell on UB.
Yeah, I think the Banks stat line is a little bit alarming because I think that Banks is a guy we've kind of touched upon what Kyrell Luke has given this team so far this year. And it's been a lot on, not only the facilitating side of the ball, Mike, with getting other guys involved, being a strong point guard, but it's also been his ability to score. I think he scored at a rate that's been a little bit better than we would have thought. But the one thing we did expect was we expected Daryl Banks to score, which he has. And if you take a look at his averages, he's averaging 17 a night. What I don't like, Mike, is he's shooting 37% to do that. Granted, he's shooting 38% from three, but he's shooting 37% from the floor. So, he's taken 103 shots this year, Mike. He's averaging 17 points in 8 games. So, do the math. He's taking, double digit shots every single game, close to probably 13 a game to get 17 points. Not bad, right? You want to be obviously under your shot attempts with what you're averaging. But he goes over 7 against UB. When Venning doesn't have it going and the team is not itself, he needs to have these monster games, I think, in order for them to be successful. That's not to say that like he's at fault for the reason that they lost. What it means is that they lack, and most Bonna teams do because they're only about 5 or 6 deep. They lack that ability when their main guy isn't going. They really need that one guy to have like that career night, 30 or high 20s and shoot a high percentage from three. They didn't get that on Saturday afternoon. I think they shot 3 where they might shoot 3 for 15 from three. Farrell had 2 of those. Banks
315, 20%, 9 of 19 from the charity stripe, 47%. Rebounds, they got out rebounded 39 to 32, 18 assists for UB to 10 for Bonna.
Yeah. I mean, Mike,
13 turnovers to 10 for UB. They just got outplayed in every aspect.
We talked about the keys, Mike, last week about what UB had to do to stay in this game. We talked about they needed to keep the game in the 60s. Well, they kept on in the 60s and they were able to play in the 8. I'm sorry, the other way around. They needed to get the game higher. I'm sorry. So I misspoke. So Bonna likes to keep the games in the 50s and 60s. UB had to get it to 80, and they did. Now, I didn't expect them to, if they got the game to 80, to hold them in the mid 60s, but they did that. The fact that they out rebounded Bonna is a total shock to me. There's nobody forward wise even remotely close to Chad Venning. So with him only playing 12 minutes, that played into UB's hand tremendously because now you're dealing with UB's guards who are fairly athletic, and they're the ones who are ending up with the rebounds because we know up front they don't have much, especially rebounding. So that was a huge key, Mike. A 7 rebound edge on the glass was just massive.
Yeah, and this game brings up some pros and cons for both teams. So far this season, we've been mostly positive about St. Bonaventure, and I think that's because they brought a roster that had 0 returning minutes or points from last year, and to have a 5-2 start, defeating Notre Dame was pretty impressive. I think this game shows a few concerns, though. If a person like Chad Venning gets into foul trouble, they're very vulnerable and overly reliant on those guards to carry them. Bonna still doesn't really have much of a bench. Their young forwards off the bench were not very helpful. Did not look like they belonged on the court. And Moses Flowers, he was brought in from Hartford to be a producer, and he had a decent overall performance off the bench. But you can see this is another one of those squads where Mark Schmidt is going to be overly reliant on the starters, and that's the way he is. The issue is, I don't know if these guards are good enough to carry St. Bonaventure in difficult situations. We saw them lose to Canisius. We excused it. And you know what? There's going to be a lot of games. There's going to be ups and downs all season with the St. Bonaventure team. And I think with the guards that they have, they're going to have some great games and they're going to have some ugly performances. And on the road, especially in these local rivalry contests, it's a little bit more difficult for Bonaventure. I don't think it's the end of the world for them. Ultimately, this year is about developing Jan Farrell, Barry Evans, Chad Venning, and continuing to get better so they can be somewhat respectable in A10 play. But I did not expect UB to be that much better. And one thing this does also address is ways of building your team. So when Bonaventure was gutted last year, they went to the transfer portal, but their way of attacking the transfer portal was to get what they considered established players from lower level conferences. They got Banks from St. Peter's, obviously Moses Flowers from From Hartford, Kyrell Luke from Holy Cross. You bring Chad Venning from Morgan State, and there's a few additional transfers. But these are mostly lower level guys, and none of them were stars in any regard. Banks obviously was part of an NCAA tournament run, but he wasn't a star at St. Peter's prior to that run. UB has kind of attacked the portal in a different way. While they didn't hit on all their big targets, they went after some bigger name guys who were at sizable schools. You get Isaiah Adams from Central Florida playing in the American Conference. You get John Smith playing from Seton Hall, Jones from Boston College. And I think what you're seeing from, and even when you look at the youngsters, Curtis Jones is a sophomore who was brought in, is going to be a 4-year player at UB most likely. And then obviously Bana had Jan Farrell. But I don't know if I love Bana going after the lower level D1 guys in the transfer portal. I would have liked to see them target a few higher end P5 caliber recruits in the transfer portal to bring to Bana that might have higher risk, lower reward, depending on how things pan out. But I expected this to be a close game, that Bana would have the edge, and it was anything but. And I think some of that is reflective in what we're going to see throughout the season.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny, Mike. I feel like every week we talk, we flip a little bit on how we feel about either.
And it's take evidence and go with it.
Yeah, it's kind of unique because I feel like it's been a long time since me and you have not had a really good grasp on these 4 teams this year. And it's just a unique situation. And I think the transfer portal, you kind of nailed it, Mike. The transfer portal is just so unique, and the number of transfers and the number of new players and needing to come together. Normally it's a few players every year. You graduate some, you bring in a transfer 2, you develop some freshmen, and you move on. Well, it's just totally different now for these schools. So it's an interesting point you make about the established players. I think established is a better word than big time talent, right? Guys are obviously talented, but they were more established than they were, their athleticism. Daryl Banks, as good as he is, he's 175 pounds soaking wet. He's not an intimidating guy by any stretch.
He's not a guy that would have expected Bonaventure to put so much into to be their star. Not saying he can't be that guy.
I mean, it's just
we've seen him at St. Peter's playing the likes of Canisius and Niagara. And I never felt that Daryl Banks III was an incredible talent. Good player, but not a guy playing 39 minutes a game in the A10 for a team that has had a recent high level of success. I'm saying he can do it in a few game spurts. We saw it in the NCAA tournament against Kentucky. It's just surprising to me. And I think it also shows the desperation Mark Schmidt was in when obviously he lost the Big Five. And I think that also shows that they thought they had a chance of keeping them. And we talked about that on our show the other week, where we thought that was a realistic option. And the transfer portal, it's good and bad. There's pros and cons. You are going to lose quality players that you are hoping to develop and have 4 years with, that could guide you to NCAA tournament, maybe win a game or two in the NCAA tournament every now and then. But you're also going to be able to bring in and reload much quicker.
Mm-hmm.
No longer is there an excuse for taking 3 years to rebuild your program. With the transfer portal, you really only get 2 years now to rebuild your program, because imagine if Nate Oates was still at UB. He would be hitting that portal hard every year. The guys UB would have had in recent years would have been sick after their runs. And it's kind of the good and bad about continuity as well. The fact that they were able to keep Janathan Williams, Rondo Segou, Josh Mballa for the seasons that they did, it was nice because you thought they were building towards a MAC tournament title, but it never happened. In hindsight, you wonder, had they had a different coach, had they brought in other guys, would they have been able to make a move or not? But that's a story for another day. And one thing I did want to also address with this quick, John, I don't want to go on forever and ever, but we had talked about UB's schedule last week, and I posted on UB Fan about my thoughts about the schedule, and they had a good rebuttal. The Tulane St. Bonaventure games are basically the equivalent of playing Kent State, Toledo, Akron in conference play. These games, well, I was looking at it from a more negative, you're going to beat up your team at Michigan State, UConn, West Virginia. Realistically, now that they beat St. Bonaventure, they have the 2D3 games. If they can find a way to win against Tulane, they could actually have a little bit better run than what I thought. And as I've been diving deeper into Ken Pom and the net rankings were just released today, the grass might be greener than what we originally thought with UB. Their one bad loss was obviously against Howard, which is near the bottom overall in Ken Pom. I believe. Let me pull it up quick here. Just be 1 second.
Like while you're looking that up too, we have the upcoming schedule for UB here on our screen.
And so I have it pulled up. The loss against Howard, they were 3-1 in Ken Pom. That's a horrible loss. But you look at the other 3 losses that UB had. James Madison, 80. Connecticut, 4. Drake, 71. Those are 3 teams that you're not ashamed of losing to. And now you look at their wins. Colgate, 114. Colgate then beat Syracuse. George Mason, 125. I believe they recently beat Toledo. And now you beat St. Bonaventure, 129. Who has beaten Notre Dame. UB is up to 165 in Ken Pom. This would now indicate that this UB team might have a little bit more fight in them than I originally thought. Ken Pom has now updated their record projection to 17-14 overall and 10-8 in the MAC. The net rankings have UB right around the 180 mark overall. I'm pulling that up right now. I have it right in front of me, 185. So we'll see what happens against Tulane, West Virginia, and Michigan State. But I do feel much better now that Curtis Jones is establishing himself as a star. And some of these UB big men are surprisingly stepping up to the challenge as well. John Smith has shown some bright spots in his limited action. Lakul Hardnett is doing okay. Isaiah Adams and then Armani Foster, I don't know if they're going to be the players we expected or were hoping for them to be this season. But if they can be the complementary pieces to Curtis Jones and Zid Powell, this UB team will be okay.
One interesting point I'd like to make too, Mike, about these, we go back to the transfer portal a little bit, but I would like to maybe get some firsthand, and this is maybe something, obviously we can't speak on, but I'd love to know what goes through Mark Schmidt's head, Jim Weitzel's head. When you have a team like Bona and UB who are, good mid-major programs, okay, do you have to change the way you coach? And I'm not talking X's and O's, Mike, but I'm talking the way you speak to, the way you coach individual players, how hard, how soft you are on them, in fear that they may just pick up and bounce year after year after year. And as a coach, you never want to feel like you're at the mercy of your players. You want to command a level of respect, right? But now with it being so easy for feelings to get hurt and emotions to run high, and how easy it is to just get up and leave a situation.
It has to change it, John.
That would be just an interesting conversation I would love to have with one of those guys. And maybe we can do that in the future, Mike. I would just love to know, hey, has this affected the way, do you feel like you mince words sometimes? Do you feel like you have to almost walk on eggshells with some of these guys because you are in a situation where if 2 or 3 of them get upset?
Let's talk about it right now. And we can reach out to some of these local coaches. Maybe we can get an answer from Reggie or Weitzel if we ever get a chance to go to a practice at some point. But I do think it does change. They might not admit to it.
Yeah.
But perfect example, Ohio University this past season. Two years ago, they played Virginia in the first round of the NCAA tournament. They upset them. Few weeks later, Jason Carter decides to transfer back to Ohio from Xavier. And Ohio thinks that they're going to have Jason Preston as their point guard, Mark Sears as their shooting guard, Jason Carter, Ben Vanderplas, and Dwight Wilson. They think that's their starting 5. Well, what happens, Jason Preston, ends up declaring for the NBA draft. He gets drafted. And then Dwight Wilson, the third, gets injured, so he has to sit the whole year. Ohio goes 25-10 last year. They have a net ranking around 130. And bless you. And it was mostly regarded as a disappointing season.
Yeah.
So in the meantime, though, Mark Sears averages around 20 points a game. Ben Vanderplas was a star in the MAC. Sears used that 20 points per game to transfer to Alabama. He's now starting on a top 20 team in the
Top
country
10.
that just upset North Carolina recently. And even though that's not really even an upset, to be honest with you. And then Ben Vanderplas is playing using his last year of eligibility at Virginia. And now you have a situation where Ohio, they have Dwight Wilson back from injury, but they're playing a lot with two transfers, one from Tulane in their starting lineup, one from Old Dominion, and they have a bunch of freshmen that they're trying to develop. And you have an Ohio team that's going to be hovering around 500 all season. They're talented, very talented freshmen. But in the past, you wondered, they had built up all for the 1 year. And if they had their starting five that they thought they were going to have, they might have had a top 50 team in the country, maybe even better, maybe a team that could be top 30, top 40 worthy, but it wasn't meant to be. Yeah. And then in the process of developing their other guys, they lost their star shooting guard to Alabama. So now, I'll wrap this Ohio story up quick. Now you have a 4-star shooting guard and an AJ Brown. You have a 3-star forward wing guy in Hadaway. And you, as a fan watching Ohio, you're wondering, well, do we give them a lot of minutes this year, knowing that if they produce at a high level, they can leverage that to transferring somewhere else? Or do you not give them minutes, hoping that'll keep them in the system? But if you don't give them minutes, are they then going to be happy with that they're not getting enough playing time? Yeah. And as a coach, you have to balance all of this. And then also realizing that your coach could leave at any moment for a better offer. And the years of thinking, oh, well, we could redshirt this guy as a freshman, focus on his development, and then in 2-3 years from now, we are going to be unbeatable. It's almost like you can't even think that way. Like Ohio, AJ Brown's brother is a top 100 recruit. AJ Brown was a top 150 recruit. So when AJ Brown is going to be a junior, his brother will be a freshman. Well, if you're Ohio, you're hoping you can keep AJ Brown another 2 years to hope to get his brother. But who even knows in 2 years if AJ Brown is still going to want to play at your school? So yes, I think the transfer portal has changed everything. And the way you use it to your advantage is you have to just win. The more you win, the better players are going to want to go to your school. So when you lose a Mark Sears, when you lose a Ben Vanderplas, or you lose the players that St. Bonaventure has recently lost, you have the ability to replace them with other big-time talent because they see what your players did and where they went, and they want to be the next group of guys that has those opportunities. Yeah. So good and bad. You should never be bad for long, long stretches of time, but it's harder to build and sustain success.
Yep, especially at this mid-major level, man. It's tough. And speaking of mid-majors, let's go down a little bit, but actually up in the net rankings, Mike. Let's talk Niagara. The Purple Eagles coming off a really impressive 4-point road win at Quinnipiac. They split the weekend with Iona and Quinnipiac, which I think is a win in their book. I think that was kind of best case scenario. Mike, I think that we're starting to learn a little bit about this Niagara team. I think that this Niagara team, as you can see here, they currently hold the highest net ranking of all the Big Four teams at 153, 17 spots ahead of Bonaventure. 30 spots ahead of, 32 spots ahead of UB, and 113 spots ahead of their friends over at Canisius. Mike, should we start buying stock in Niagara?
I don't want to start buying stock in Niagara as a favorite in the MAC, but I do think we should start buying stock as a middle of the pack team in the conference. Beating Quinnipiac was impressive. On the road against a team that was off to a 7-1 start and being able to hold on late, I think Niagara is showing some real potential. I don't think their ceiling is great, but they definitely have um, some talent on their roster. Noah Thomason is turning into a star for them in this conference. 24 points, 5 assists against Quinnipiac. He's the go-to guy. Get the ball in his hands. He's going to make magic happen.
Yeah.
And that is nice to see someone step up. Obviously, losing Marcus Hammond was a tremendous loss. We've been mentioning that every week on the show, that you can't just simply replace him. But maybe they did. Maybe they did, because Noah Thomason is that guy right now. And he was able to get some help from Aaron Gray, who, despite 5 of 14 from the field, you'd like to see a little bit better from that. Nearly had a double-double with 14 points, 9 rebounds. And Niagara doesn't do it flashy. They shot 40% from the field. Quinnipiac was 47% from the field. But Niagara was great from deep, 10 of 24, 41.7%. The boards were nearly identical against Quinnipiac, and the turnovers were even overall. So this was a game that was very close throughout. And I'm proud of Niagara. The Iona game was obviously difficult. They were handled, if we're being fair. But Iona's going to do that to most teams in the Metro Atlantic Athletic Conference this year. And we saw Iona do the same thing against Canisius a few days later, defeating them by 30. So what I like is that it seems like this Purple Eagle squad is battling for their coach. They are pesky. They don't give up in games.
Yeah.
I saw a clip of Greg Paulus speaking to his team during the St. John's game recently, and I like the energy that is coming out of their program. I know this is a lot of general stuff I'm saying, but I think that they keep showing that fight. I'm just waiting to see if they can take that next step up. As you mentioned, that net ranking, I think it's a little inflated in the 150 mark. I don't think they're that level of team. Ken Palm has them in the 230s, but I will say they are much better than what they were 2, 3, 4 years ago.
Well, I think this is a perfect example of a team that's actually doing it in 2022 the opposite way of most teams, Mike. Most teams are going to go out, they're going to get talented individual players and teach them how to play as a unit. I think Greg Paulus is doing it the opposite way. He's got a squad that was, lost his best player. He's teaching these guys to be a team. And while they're not the most talented group of players, they're probably never going to win a game in the 80s. All right. I don't know how many games they'll win in the 70s. But that to me says more about a team at this level in the Metro Atlantic than it would about a team like we know about Iona. We know that they have Rick Pitino. And we also know that Rick Pitino would never be at Iona had it not been for some of the issues he had at Louisville. So we can be honest about that, okay? The same way I don't think Jim Barron would have ended up at Canisius had it not been for getting let go at Rhode Island and his son just happened to be at that stage of his career. So I think things happen for a reason, and then they leave, and then these schools come back down or back up to reality. So the Iona thing I can get over. I'm not necessarily saying let's buy stock in them as a contender to Iona's throne. What I'm saying is I think we could get them for pennies on the dollar. They're probably nickels on the dollar right now, where they were pennies on the dollar a few weeks ago. And they were probably half a penny on the dollar 2 months ago. So their stock is rising. They're playing hard. They're finding ways to win. And at this level, I think that's more important for a culture perspective. You talked about a few weeks ago, you mentioned Greg Paulus, kind of where is he at right now? Like where's the pulse of this program? This is kind of I don't want to say, you didn't say make or break, but you said kind of this is an important year for him. Where does he go from here? What kind of, does he take that next step? And I think that he's proving to be a player's coach. These guys play hard for him. And we'll see after this year, no matter where they finish 10-20 or 500 and win a MAC. I think if they can get and win a MAC tournament game, win 15 games, that'd be great, right? Let's see if they can keep these guys around. Let's see if they can keep this momentum, get a couple of recruits. I'd like to see him.
That's the next step. Yeah. They need to improve their recruiting overall and start bringing in guys that don't take till their senior year to be impact players. You need a few guys that are younger that you can build around so you can have a 2-3 year run of sustained success. And obviously, Marcus Hammond was one of those guys. And I believe, let me look this up, is he finally playing at Notre Dame? I think I heard that he was back. He is back playing for Notre Dame. He saw one game, scored 6 points. So nice to see him
Is that
back there.
against Syracuse?
But when you look at Ken Pom quick with this Niagara team, they've essentially lost to the teams that you'd expect them to lose to, and they've won the teams that you would expect them to win against. Maryland, they're number 19 in Ken Pom, 22-point loss. St. John's, 46 in Ken Pom, 8-point loss. I thought that was an impressive fight in the road.
Yeah.
Iona, 81. They lose by 22. Bucknell, 223, but they're 6-3. Tough game early in the season. But you beat Central Arkansas 324, Stetson 257, DeUville obviously D2, and then Quinnipiac was 167, and you beat them on the road. That is a strong MAC win against a team that's probably going to be one of the contenders in this conference this year. And Ken Pom right now has Niagara going 16-13 overall.
That would be nice.
Most of the conference is pretty average right now, pretty below average to be honest. And last year Niagara was 190 in Ken Pom. Despite having a losing record. And you look at 2021, they were 250, 2020, 300, and then 2019, 315 under Chris Casey. So Niagara really didn't have a lot of success in recent years. And what you said is kind of spot on. This team doesn't really have high level playmakers outside of Noah Tomlinson, and Aaron Gray is going to be solid as well. But they get it done as a team. Yeah. While a squad like St. Bonaventure is literally just their starting five, granted, maybe their bench players would see minutes at a school like Niagara or Canisius. You look at Niagara, and they're giving everybody minutes. Everybody. You look at the numbers right here. Only 2 players averaging double-digit points, but you have 6 players averaging over 20 minutes a game. You have 7 that, if you include Lance Irving at 19 plus minutes a game. And then you still have close to a handful of people around 8 minutes a game. So Greg Paulus is not afraid of using his entire bench out there. And that's going to be good for development. You look at the deeper numbers on Ken Pom, there's a lot of red, which means there's a lot of areas that they need to improve in. But the fact that they're able to get some wins early in the season, despite their struggles, despite only having a few go-to players, means that they are doing whatever it takes. And those are players buying into their coach. And when you have a team that buys into their coach, that's playing for each other, I'm going to trust in a conference like the MAC that's eventually going to result in some wins.
Yeah. And Mike, there's one thing I want to bring up too, a little unrelated to what we were just talking about, but I think it goes to what we talk about kind of weekly about Canisius and Niagara, and maybe the expectations. The thing about Canisius and Niagara is they are definitely a step below UB and St. Bonaventure in terms of expectations, in terms of financial investment in the program, size of the school, funding, basically anything you could think of, right? And I think part of the reason why a school like that isn't super successful, and I'm going to take a little shot here, the local talent at the high school level around here is not the greatest, and it's not necessarily developed the greatest. And what I mean by that is I think there is quality players in Western New York high school basketball who would be good fits at Canisius and Niagara. But I think there's a lot of people that tell some of these kids that they should be at a bigger and better school. And I think they feed them a little bit of false hope and a little bit of dreams, per se. Roddy Gale's at Ohio State right now, scoring double figures. That's great, right? Dom Welch is at Alabama, hasn't played yet due to injury. Prior to that, he went to St. Bonaventure. Mike, Takal Molson's at James Madison, but he's on his third school. Okay, he's successful, third school. You can count on one hand the number of successful Division One players that there's been out of Western New York in the last 5 to 10 years. Okay. And I think part of that, Mike, is that if some of these kids realize, hey, I could be a big fish in a small pond, go to Canisius, go to Niagara, and I could contribute right away. Okay. And I could be successful right away. And I could get recognition and I could score a lot of points. And I could potentially put myself in a position to make money to play professional basketball following the completion of my degree. That doesn't happen enough, Mike. There's too many players that try and play up and try and go up, and they end up failing, and then they wind up back down low. But some of their egos, some of their advice, they don't want to go back to a Canisius or Niagara. They'd rather try and make it somewhere else. Um, that's I just think that the fact that they can't recruit locally, like the last time Canisius Niagara had anybody local, was Takal Molson at Canisius and he left. That kills a school like that because they can't go get a guy who quality in the area, sit him for a year and develop him. It gets butts in the seats. It gets other local guys wanting to come. It gets the guy who maybe could go a little higher, says, "No, I'm going to stay local. I'm going to go to Canisius. I'm going to go to Niagara." We don't have that, and that's unfortunate. And I think it's a little bit more selfish of me. I would love to see more local kids be successful. And unfortunately, we just don't have that many. We got a lot that go to Damon. I mean, Mike McDonald does a nice job, recruiting local. He's got a bunch in his starting lineup and a bunch that come off the bench, and that's great. And I think that's awesome. But there's not enough guys to me that I think every year Reggie should be getting a guy local. You
Yeah.
know,
So I got a few points I want to carry on top of that. I think there's problems on both sides. I think number one, the way high school sports are run in this part of the state is just awful. I think it starts with Section 6. I think they're an embarrassment to high school athletics. I think Section 6 is honestly one of the worst run high school athletic associations that I've been close to. I've lived in Ohio, West Virginia, Indiana. Every area I've been blows this area away when it comes to their high school athletic associations running high school sports. So number one, that right there, we can get into Bennett football and the joke of what happened with them this year.
Yeah.
Good for them for winning a state title.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
spite of Section 6 trying to screw them
Congratulations
over.
to Bennett High School and
And
those kids for what
when
they
you're
did.
talking about Section 6 and them screwing over Bennett, you also have to start wondering, why are some of these suburb schools the ones that are benefiting from stuff while a city school gets punished? You wonder what truly is going on behind closed doors. And I don't think it would all be kind to some of the people involved, but that's another story. Secondly, I don't think the coaching in this area is up to par. In Indiana, when it comes to high school, you have a ton of AAU, you have a ton of field houses, development programs. These kids are playing basketball year round in Indiana. And I'm not advocating just playing one sport. But I worked in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which is a city that has about 250,000 people, a metro of 400,000. So it's about 40% of the total size of Erie County. They have top 150 recruits almost every other year coming out of there because they put an emphasis on basketball. They have top flight coaches. They have top flight training coaches that don't even work at these schools, that just work year round on drills and coaching up these young talent. The AAU circuit there, unbelievable. These kids enter high school and they're already elite at what they can do.
Yeah.
They're shooting, they're passing, they're dribbling, their athleticism. Guys like Caleb Swanigan. I could go on and on and on with some of the names. Jack Ferguson recently, Keon Brooks, Williams, who played for Louisville. I've seen top 50 guys. Buffalo is 2.5 times the size of Fort Wayne if you count all of Erie County. You're telling me there's not people that are just as athletic or talented
Yeah,
in Buffalo? Are
yeah,
you kidding me? Of course there is.
yeah.
But you know what's lacking? The proper coaching, the proper
The proper
development,
care. Yeah,
the proper people in place. The coaching in this area, I'm not saying this to kill the high school coaching, but it's minor league. Like we do not have the proper resources into developing these kids, into developing these athletes. It's not just about high school. You need the resources outside of high school. And then you factor in why can't Canisius get better players? Why can't Niagara get better players? Well, you also have to want to put an emphasis into improving your program.
yeah.
These
Well,
kids,
yeah.
so in Indiana, where you have literally tens of dozens of kids from Fort Wayne going college basketball every year. Because if they're not going high end like Purdue, Indiana, Michigan State, Ohio State, which believe me, those kids are going to those schools. Then they're going to Ball State. They're going to Ohio University. They're going to Western Michigan. They're going to those schools. But then the people that can't go to those schools, they're going to that NAI level to St. Francis. They're going to Indiana Wesleyan. They all know if I put time and effort into my craft, I'm going to get a scholarship to college and get a free education somewhere. And for whatever reason in Buffalo, we don't have that mentality. Like you said, there's a mentality. Well, if I'm good, I'm getting told to go to some Big Ten school where I'm going to sit on the bench and do nothing for 4 years, or
Yeah.
I'm told to go to some American school where I'm not good enough, sitting on the bench.
Or vice versa, Mike. There's a lot of pressure put on some of these kids early when they
Find
get
a
that
school,
look in
yeah,
ninth grade.
find a
Like,
school that you're comfortable. And you know why the pressure is on those kids from a young age? Because we don't develop them properly. We are putting unfair expectations on them at a young age.
you
And
know,
if we just focused on what was best for the kids, it's not bad if Canisius is where you end up. It's not bad if Niagara
no,
is where you end up.
that's it, Mike. Mike, that's it. That's it. It's if you have the ability to go play college basketball, Canisius and Niagara, that's Division I program. Exactly. We can sit here and debate all day that they're a lower level Division I program. We don't have to. The two things are not mutually exclusive. Okay, we don't have to be. We can be critical of the programs, but also understand that if you are talented enough to make it to that level, that you have done something right along the way. Because those none of those guys are bums. Okay,
They
and
all have talent. They all have. You could be a D1 basketball player, even at the lowest level. You have to have one elite skill set. You are either a tremendous athlete, or you have tremendous height, or you have a tremendous shot, tremendous passer, tremendous ball handler. You have to have one elite skill set to be a Division I basketball player. That is what separates D2 guys from D1 guys. And believe me, I would play
yep,
basketball with a D3 guy who played some JUCO all the time a year ago, and we would play horse and just screw around. I consider myself an okay shooter. Like if I'm just open gym, I can hit 50% of my threes uncontested. If you get a hand in my face, it goes down a lot lower. But I never beat this guy in horse once. I'm talking about a bench guy at a D3 school. And I swear he hit like 75, 80% of his uncontested threes. Never missed.
yeah,
Never missed. And that's a bottom level college basketball player. When you get to the D1 level, if you watch Canisius play in shoot arounds, these guys can do incredible things.
yep,
So what we need to start doing is we need to start hyping up these local schools, but they also have to start hyping
yeah,
themselves up. They are too
yep,
content with
yeah. It's a
the
two-way street.
mediocrity.
It's a
And
two-way street, Mike. You're right.
I had one person on the Canisius board said, start discussing how to fix the problems at Canisius. How do we end this mediocrity? How do we end this recent string of 25 years plus without going to an NCAA tournament? And I think that's something I'm going to save for a later show.
Yeah,
We do want to talk a little bit about Canisius and their weekend, but what I will say is you want to know how to fix it. You need the school to start caring about winning and losing basketball games. And right now they don't care. Number
well,
two,
yeah,
you have to invest in your program. You can't just put bottom tier money into it and expect results to happen. When UB started putting money in their sports, that's when they started winning. When they stopped putting money in their basketball, and because let's be real, they're not paying Whitesell what they were going to pay Nate Oates, the results started going away.
Yeah.
You win in college sports by recruiting at an elite level, by promoting your brand, and winning on social media. Because you win on social media, you put money into recruiting, and you take a bold action on a head coach, either a head coach that you know is an elite developer or a head coach that you know is elite at his interaction with young athletes that can convince them to come to your institution. Then you can start changing the level of talent that you have at your program. And that's how you take it to the next level.
Yeah.
And we'll get more into that in a different time. But there's a reason why Rick Pitino goes to Iona, and now suddenly Iona is the level ahead. There's a reason why Nate Oates and Bobby Hurley were at UB, and suddenly UB went from being happy with 20 win seasons to expecting 20 plus win seasons and NCAA tournaments. There's a reason why Mark Schmidt took Bonaventure to the next level.
We talked.
You invest and you have the right guys, anything is possible.
And we talked earlier, Mike, too, about wanting to maybe speak to some college coaches about the mentality that if it's changed their mentality, right, with coaching. I would love to talk to some high school coaches from the city, from the suburbs, from outside, and get their take on this. And I think a guy that'd be great to talk to, Mike, would be Ty Parker over at Health Science Charter School. Okay, he's been a guy that's been around for a long time. He's heavily involved in AAU, and he has sent players to every single level. And I think that'd be a perfect guy to talk to and get a gauge of. He sends guys every year, Mike. Is there guys that he thinks should go higher that don't end up going higher? Yeah, sure. But he sends guys to low level, USCAA, Division III, Division II, NAI, and Division I. As recently as Devontae Gaines went to Tennessee, didn't work out for him at Tennessee. He ended up at I believe George Mason after that.
Still, that's not a bad result. That's still an A-10 school. And
that'd be a perfect guy to talk to. Like what when you're coaching these guys and you see, okay, I have a Devontae Gaines who's been recruited to Division I since he's been 14, 15 years old. I have other guys who are decent players who, would be great players at Bryan Stratton, be great players at a Damon, be great players at a Duville or a Hilbert or a Madai.
That's definitely
tell them to convince them, hey, listen, this is a great opportunity for you. And that's what I think he does a good job of. And I've met Ty a couple times. He's also heavily involved in these kids' lives, Mike. He's always at their signing days. He's always at their events, and he's always, granted, is he at everybody's? No, but he's at a lot, Mike. He's at a lot, and it might not be the whole time, but he makes an appearance and he let these kids know, listen, I'm here to support you, and I'm going to give you the advice. And he's involved in AAU, and there's a lot of guys that do that, and I think he'd be a perfect guy to talk to.
I think we should definitely get a guy like that on the show to have this discussion and figure out how to fix it. Because for a market of our size, there's really no excuse for us not to have better talent come out of this area. I know people will point out Paul Harris, Johnny Flynn from Niagara Falls, and Christian Leitner in the 90s.
Moan Brown.
But the Moan Brown. And yes, Buffalo has had some good players that have come out, some great players, quite frankly, but it does not happen at the frequency that it should. I know Indiana is the Hoosier State, and it's a different breed over there with the field houses, with the high schools getting really into. You're talking 4,000-seat gyms for some of these schools in Indiana, while Buffalo, we're a little bit so-so. We don't really care as much about our high school, but we have too many good young athletes for really the lack of people really making a name for themselves in this area. And I really am curious to see how it changes, because on the football side of things, I understand. We're not a football climate. It's more of a running based attack in Buffalo, while when you get to the Midwestern states and the Southern states, their game is much more evolved on the high school level. But UB for football has struggled with that. Basketball, much easier sport, way easier to find people that are athletic. It needs to get fixed. And John, let's just wrap up with Canisius quick. Obviously a tough weekend for them. They had a close contest against Siena that went down to the wire. Looked like they had a chance at pulling it out. Some questionable rough officiating, let's be frank. Some questionable calls late in that one. that went against Canisius. You never know what type of whistle you're going to get in Albany.
Yeah.
And that ended up being setting up a brutal weekend where outmanned against Iona, really didn't have a chance in that contest. And now you look at Canisius overall, 2-6 and 0-2 in MAC play. What are your thoughts after this past weekend?
Yeah, I left Mike after the Siena game. I was kind of encouraged. They thought they showed a lot of fight. That's not an easy place to play. It's not an easy place to win. I thought they got a poor whistle down the stretch. I just think that it's really tough when you get in those final minutes. You're playing the free throw game on the road, and then they had that chance. They were down 3. Siena does the right thing and they foul. It's just tough. I then went to Iona, Mike. I knew they were going to lose. 30 points. Yeah, it's not ideal. Is the talent that much better? I don't know. Probably, but it's discouraging primarily, Mike, because now we look at their schedule and it doesn't get easier. At Toledo, at Penn State, at FGCU, then back into MAC play. So I'm not feeling great about Canisius. I haven't really felt great about them all year long, but I am a Reggie rooter. I am a Reggie supporter. I think he's a great guy. I hope that he can gut out some conference wins this year, but I just don't think this team is very talented on the court. They have some guys who can play a little bit, but somebody's got to score, Mike. In basketball, somebody's got to score. So yeah, Henderson's putting up a lot of points. Taj has been pretty good as a rookie, but I don't know. I don't see this team winning many games.
Ken Palm agrees with you. Ken Palm has them 9-20 overall, 7-13 in the MAAC. Right now, they are 297, which is near the bottom quarter of the country. Net ranking is a little bit higher. I believe they're 266. Yep, that's where they are. There's a lot of issues right now. First, they don't have a go-to scorer. Obviously, you got 3 players, Jameer Moultrie, Taj Savesky, Jordan Henderson, all around that 13-point per game mark. Henderson's doing it on 39.8% shooting. Savesky, 37.3% shooting. And Moultrie off the bench at 41.7.
Yeah.
Those are not field goal percentages that will get it done for your top 3 scorers.
If none of your leading scorers are shooting over 40%, what are the other guys shooting?
Yeah.
Right?
And you look at the rest of the guys on the team, there isn't much high-end talent. I'll be quick on this, but just going through some of the Ken Palm numbers. Adjusted efficiency on offense is 294th in the country. Adjusted efficiency defensively is 284th. So they're in basically the bottom 80 in both of those categories. Effective field goal percentage is under 300th in the country. They are okay with their turnover percentage and offensive rebound percentage, but they struggle with giving up boards. Their 2-point field goal percentage is 340th in the country, which is in the bottom 25. They are overly reliant on 3-pointers. 40% of their points come off the 3 this year. They're just a team that, quite frankly, they're not good enough defensively, and they are overly dependent on kind of jacking up long shots. They can't make shots inside the 3-point line. And you can get away with that against some of the lesser teams in D1. Yeah. But against the quality of teams that they're playing right now, it's been a struggle. They were able to get a win against St. Bonaventure, which we said you don't know what you're going to see out of the Bonaguards. If they're playing well, tough to beat. They're struggling. It's going to be a tough day. But overall, 1 win against a D1 opponent so far this season. Another win, Fredonia State. And it's not going to look better. Toledo is a top 100 team. Penn State top 40 right now in Ken Palm. Florida Gulf Coast 140. Ryder top 200. Ken Palm has them potentially losing their next 7.
Yeah.
Reggie has to find a way to get
he's got to gut out some wins, Mike. He's got to gut out some wins. He's got to make them ugly. They could be in the 40s or the 50s, but they got to gut out some ugly wins.
And this is where you have to really ask yourself, if you're Canisius, you're Reggie Witherspoon, where's the program going? So obviously Reggie had the first couple years where he was solid, 18-16, then 21-12. had talent like Isaiah Reese, Takal Molson. Things were looking good. It looked like it was a continuation of what Jim Barron was doing. It was some life in the program,
Yep.
possibility of making the NCAA tournament. You look at since 2019, 15 and 17 to 12 and 20. They had 7 and 6 during the COVID year, 11 and 21 last year, 2 and 6. The highest they've been in Ken Palm since then was 251 in the 2021 season.
Yeah.
They have basically fallen to what they were pre Jim Barron, Tom Parada. They're not quite that bad at this point, but Ken Palm thinks they're not far off. And with Reggie getting up there in age, with the program struggling, kind of feeling lifeless at this point, and you go to the Canisius games, they let him hear it at the Kessler Athletic Center. You have to wonder how much longer is he going to want to go forward at Canisius, and how much longer is the Canisius administration going to want him there. At first, when they brought him to Canisius, it was a good name, great local coach who had experience at ECC, Sweet Home, and UB. Now it's starting to wear thin. Like you said, we both love Reggie. We both have known him since his days at UB. We support him. We respect everything that he's done for the local basketball community. But it feels like if this losing streak does get to where it potentially could go to, that we might be appearing closer to that. And that's if Canisius actually wants to try to get back to winning or make a serious move in the future. If not, if they're content with the losing, I guess he could stay there for a while. But it feels like we're closer to the end than we are fixing things at the program.
Yeah, we'll see, Mike. It's going to be an interesting finish to this calendar year. I want to dive into some X's and O's next time out, Mike, about maybe why this Canisius team isn't as good, instead of just sitting here and saying, because I think
I'm not bashing Reggie.
No, and I agree, and I think sometimes we could benefit from maybe showing our viewers and our.
It's just his 7th year, and you're farther away now than what you were when you started.
I agree.
At some point, that's coaching, and you look at the roster. These are his players.
Yeah.
These are the guys he's brought in.
This program now.
At some point, like I said, we know it's difficult. We know there's the problems with the Buffalo pipeline. We know there's a lot of issues when you're trying to convince people to come to Canisius and Niagara from out of town. You have to convince people, hey, don't worry about the snow. Don't worry about the reputation that some people think about Buffalo from a national perspective. But and obviously Reggie is doing it different ways. I just think it should be better at this point. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, I agree, Mike. And I think we all hope for the best and hope for improvement. So let's just hope, like I said, they can gut some wins out, get a couple under their belt as they go into MAC play here and rock and roll. But Mike, we're going to wrap up for the week again. We thank everyone that kind of tunes in here on Mondays. And, we talked about doing some, getting some other people on, Mike, and I think we're going to start doing that. I'd like to try and talk to some local college coaches, talk to some local high school coaches, and kind of dive more into what we talked about today, local talent, the transfer portal, and all that stuff. So just want to thank Mike Bunn again, my man, for coming on here. All the numbers, all the stats, all the info. It's always nice to talk. Again, all 4 programs in a different spot right now. It seems like a different spot every week, but we're going to be back next Monday, 6:30, talking Big 4 hoops, and hope y'all can rejoin us again.